Why was the King's trip to Paris so poignant? Have the royals been the victims of a political power move? And is William stealing the Sussexes' American thunder? We've got a show with an international flavour today. Hello and welcome to Palace Confidential. I'm Jo Elvin, and joining me on the world's best royal show is the Daily Mail's editor-at-large and veteran royal reporter Richard Kay and the paper's diary editor Richard Eden. Welcome to you both. Now, a quick reminder that if you enjoy our show, please like and subscribe to our channel to be reminded whenever a new episode arrives. Now, we're going to hear from my esteemed guests in just a moment, but before then, we're going to hear from Rebecca English, who is in Paris reporting on the King and Queen's state visit to France.
Last night, Their Majesties dined amid the gilded splendour of Versailles. But today, unfortunately, Palace Confidential viewers have to make do with a slightly less glamorous backdrop of my hotel room curtains. But after a whirlwind of events on the first day of their state visit to France, there is only one way to describe things: magnifique. That's actually how King Charles described the warmest of welcomes that he and Queen Camilla received after landing in Paris. Now, for a couple in their 70s, they are packing in the engagements, 22 in just 2.5 days. Now, yesterday was full on pomp and ceremony. After their official arrival, Charles and Camilla, who was a pop of colour in Fiona Clare and Philip Tracy, made their way to the Arc de Triomphe, where there was a really spectacular welcome ceremony involving their host, President Macron, and his wife, Brigitte Macron, which culminated in a spectacular flypast by the British Red Arrows and their French counterparts. There were bilateral meetings, tree plantings, and even cries of Vive le Roi during an impromptu walkabout, which I suspect is the first time France has heard that phrase in several hundred years. And there's no doubt that President Macron, who of course was forced to postpone this state visit from earlier on this year amid huge civil unrest in France, was rolling out the red carpet for King Charles. In fact, from my ringside seat, I observed nothing but the warmest of relationships between the two men. And that goes for their wives too. Apparently, Madame Macron is an avid follower of the British royal family in French magazines. And I saw her very courteously help Queen Camilla, not just down the steps at the Élysée Palace, but when they were on the red carpet at Versailles last night, Camilla's beautiful Dior cape slightly fell off her shoulder. And I watched as Madame Macron very sweetly helped her rectify it so they could turn around and face the cameras together.
Rebecca English there, reporting from France, while we're sitting here in a studio in London. Richard Kay, Richard Eden, it's going to be a little bit confusing today with two Richards. Would one of you let me call you Gary, just for the day?
Sir?
Sir Richard Kay, I'm going to come to you first. A big occasion for the King in a city that he has a rather complicated relationship with.
I think it's a poignant trip for Charles for several reasons. Obviously, the most obvious is that it was there that he went to collect the body of Princess Diana 26 years ago. That's going to be forever marking him. But also his earlier tours to France with Diana, where he was completely overshadowed by her. Through no fault of her own, the French fell in love with her on that trip in 1988, from what I can remember. And this time it's an entirely different Charles. You can see it in his body language. He's much more comfortable in his role as king, as monarch, if you like, but with Camilla at his side, who's in no danger of overshadowing him.
Goodness, that's quite a strong statement. I thought she looked amazing.
Oh, she looks great, yeah. But the cameras aren't going to be locked into her in quite the same way as they were on a much younger Diana.
And yes, you were there on that tour, weren't you? 35 years ago. What are your memories of that trip, and what do you remember about Diana's impact on the hosts?
Well, mainly what I remember is that we had a rather stuffy president in Mitterrand, who was in the Élysée Palace at the time, who wanted, he was coming to the end of his time, and he wanted a bit of glitter and glamour, I think, on those final days of his administration. And Charles had his usual fairly serious issues he wanted to address, but everything was about Diana. One particular strong memory is of them attending a remembrance service, and she wore a veiled hat, and she looked incredibly sexy, and the pictures went around the world. these were not quite the end of days in the Wales' marriage, but we were beginning to talk about what on earth was going on, because they didn't look as though they particularly enjoyed being in each other's company.
Gosh, hindsight's a wonderful thing. But Richard Eden, we did see Macron grasp the king by his arm, which your colleague Kate Manzi called a power play biceps squeeze. What did you make of it?
Just keep your hands off our king.
You've said it before. When will anyone listen?
Yeah, no, why is it that everyone seems to think that, you know, our head of state is someone who can be, you know, pushed, pulled around like some sort of dolly or something?
He's just irresistible.
You know, we saw President Joe Biden, who'd also sort of enjoyed, you know, pushing him around a bit. And then, I mean, look, President Emmanuel Macron is a very touchy-feely kind of guy, and so that was, you know, it was a friendly gesture. I'm not saying there was anything, you know, unkind about it, but I think it is different because we're used to having, you know, as our monarch, the Queen, who was obviously towards the end a very elderly lady who was held in the utmost respect. So generally, I think everyone was very careful about how you treat her, and then they're adopting a much more sort of relaxed relationship with King Charles. Whether he likes it though or not, I'm not sure.
He could have kissed him, let's face it. It's French after all.
Very European. I mean, it does feel like a somewhat proprietal move, doesn't it? Sort of like to be manhandling.
Yeah, I mean, well, we can't complain. You know, he's been laying on the most wonderful state visit, and it's clear that President Macron wants to show the esteem in which the British royal family is held in France.
I love that Richard Eden said, we can't complain just after complaining. It's like, always my favourite. Richard Kay, we also saw Prince William make a major trip to New York earlier this week as part of the Earthshot Prize. And he pulled in some quite big figures. He's clearly keen to make this a major flagship role for him, isn't he? I
think so. I mean, he had some major figures alongside him. He met with the UN Secretary General. He had the former New Zealand Premier there, and of course Mike Bloomberg, the ex-New York Mayor. Some powerful figures. But two things struck me about that trip, and it's all over now. One, that he went solo, no Kate to steal the headlines, and the fact that he was much more comfortable when he met people like Gates, who are sort of on board with his Earthshot project, and much more uncomfortable when he met a president, and he met a Latin American president, and the conversation was rather stilted. It was all done through a translator, and on those occasions, William doesn't have the fluidity of his father, who was so wonderful at that sort of meeting. He's learning, but he is learning, and it was impressive.
Do you really think that Catherine wasn't there to stop headlines being stolen, or she just had something else to do or didn't want to go? Or?
Well, there may be all sorts of explanations why she wasn't there, but I mean, I think one has to take what one can out of it, and the fact is that without her there, it becomes less of a fashion show and, wow, isn't Kate glamorous and gorgeous? And it's more about him and what he wants to say.
Richard Eden, when he was introducing him, Mike Bloomberg, who Richard Kay mentioned there, said that William's approval ratings of 60% with both Republicans and Democrats was unheard of in the country since 1776. What do you make of that?
Yes, I mean, it did seem a bit of a loving, you know, but Michael Bloomberg was one of the original backers of the Earthshot Prize. I think he was one of the donors to it, so I think he really believes in it. And I think Prince William has really sort of captured that American spirit, that can-do spirit, that optimistic...
Yes, what did he say? No one does optimism and ingenuity like the American people.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And remember, that's what the Earthshot Prize is all about, because, you know, his father, you know, over the years, obviously he's been a bit of a prophet on environmental stuff, but he has been very gloomy. You know, he always reminds me of that character in Dad's Army, you know, we're doomed, we're doomed. And he's always warning about how we've only got so many, you know, years left before we all die or whatever. So Prince William, by contrast, has tried to be much more positive, and it's all about what can we do to make a difference? What practical schemes can we do? And this was about rewarding schemes that can make a difference. I think that seems to have tapped into that positive American spirit, I think. And
just for anyone who's thinking that being a royal is all glamour, Richard Kay, he threw on some waders and sort of like waded into the Hudson River and then went running in Central Park in the morning. really reminded me of the sort of down-to-earth stuff that Diana would have done.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it was a Mr. Darcy moment, wasn't it, with his
I don't
shirt
know.
open. Maybe not the waders, but anyway, I mean, yes, there was something about Diana about that, if you like. It was the spontaneity of it. Going for a run in Central Park was a very straight out of Diana's playbook. And I think he's trying to show a human side to him. And one of William's problems is, he's not a natural on his feet. He's slightly awkward, cautious. He's always been cautious. So's Kate too. And he's trying to show that there's a more open side to him. He can be a bit more spontaneous.
And you've been on a lot of royal trips, and a lot of those to America. How have you found the royal perception from the public there? Do they like them?
Well, they're fascinated by the British royal family, and there's a sort of a love-hate relationship with Britain, of course. But the royals are glamour par none. I mean, they hold the British royals even higher than they do their own homegrown celebrities from California, from Los Angeles. And I mean, Diana had New York in her hand for many years. Charles avoided going to the East Coast because it was so seen as to be synonymous with those who supported the Princess of Wales. But that's all changed now, and William is now very much his own man, and I think he is demonstrating that he's his mother's son, if you like, in many ways, and they like him, and I think we're going to see a lot more of him in America.
Do you think he's just shy?
Awkward.
Right.
Yes, I think possibly there is an element of shyness with him. He's like careful about saying too much. Everything is fairly scripted with William. I think you can imagine there's a lot of soul searching goes into everything he says. I think he labours over every word of his speeches.
Yeah, I don't think I could quite cope with literally everything that came out of my mouth being scrutinised. I think I'd be, yeah, exactly. Wouldn't be good. We'll have more on William in New York soon, but in particular how it compares to his brother's time in America in just a moment. First, let's hear some of your comments. Chris Carson had this to say about the Duchess of Sussex's speech at the Invictus Games. I thought Meghan's speech at Invictus was a big mistake. She spoke of the Games and herself as being all about family, yet she and Harry have thrown away two families. The hypocrisy was hard to stomach. Following up on our story last week about the Prince and Princess of Wales hiring a CEO for their operation, Supernovae had this to say: Prince William and Princess Catherine are modern. They want to change the old system by talking directly to the CEO and not having those private secretaries all over. That's wonderful because they can react faster. Welcome to the modern world. Well, let's get back to my panel now. And Richard Eden, you have written about the Prince of Wales trip, comparing it to a recent trip made by his brother Harry. What did you have to say?
I have seen it said that, yes, William the Conqueror, defeated Harold in the Battle of New York.
Harold. Yeah.
Which obviously is what he calls him in his book, so Harry is called by Prince William. I think William's trip to New York was a stark contrast. I think just the sort of calm nature of the trip. You remember when Harry and Meghan came for an awards ceremony in New York, it sort of descended into chaos, really, of their own making, I would say. They put out this statement they'd been involved in a near catastrophic high-speed car chase through the streets of New York when they'd insisted on staying at a friend's house, and they'd been trying to shake off the paparazzi that had been following them. And it sort of, the whole thing became sort of enveloped in questions, different accounts from the New York Police Department. I think by contrast, William, as Richard has said, is sort of in keeping with his tone generally, kept things calm and sensible.
Calm and sensible. Well, Richard Cates reported that Harry's future plans are to be a global philanthropist. That's not hard. That's not easy to say. Do you think that William this week has maybe proved that perhaps the best way to do that, if you're not a billionaire, is to be a royal?
I think you're absolutely right. I think William has demonstrated that the weight of the British royal family behind you is the best way forward to announce initiatives and even to raise money. I mean, there is a difference between the kind of philanthropy that Harry wants to be involved in and the kind of charitable work that the British royal family do. They're not lining their own pockets, William, Kate and the rest of the royal crew here, whereas Harry and Meghan have to make a living. They have to make philanthropy work for them.
It's interesting, isn't it? But Richard Eden, can you imagine that William's apparent popularity in New York is stinging over in Montecito. I mean, a certain member of the royal family didn't even get a public happy birthday last week.
I think it probably really is. You know, I mean, when Harry and Meghan moved to California, I think there was very much the expectation that, you know, they would be the royals overseas. It would be that rival kind of court. So to see his brother you know, becoming more popular than him in his adopted home now really must be striking. And yes, what you're referring to there was that there was no public happy birthday messages from the rest of the royal family. And you know, it was striking because on social media in the past we have had these type of messages put out. Well, Buckingham Palace officials sort of quietly explained the logic behind it, which I'll tell you the logic is that they generally don't wish a happy birthday to people who are not working members of the royal family.
I love that there's a rule book for this.
There is, apparently, there is.
Yeah.
And because it would become too complicated, because where would you stop? You know, would you do it for Zara Tindall or for all the others? So they say we won't do it. But then people say, well, why did you do it before for Harry? Well, the reason was they didn't want to look too petty. After he'd moved to America, they thought it would look very churlish if suddenly they didn't wish him. But for me, it really highlights the problems, doesn't it? That you've got a man who is the king's son. You know, he's the brother of our future king. But then he sort of becomes a non-person. So it really highlights the awkward nature of their relationship now.
Was he born in 86?
It's his 39th.
Oh, OK, so maybe they're just saving it for the big 4-0 next year. That's what I was trying to figure out.
Yeah, that must be it, Joe. That must be it.
That is it. Someone at Buckingham Palace is thinking, I should have thought of that. But also, Richard Eden, a word on Thomas Markle now. We haven't seen Meghan's father for quite some time, but he's turned up again. His latest pleas, I think he did an interview with Good Morning Britain. It just seemed a bit sad. He compares the 5 years he hasn't seen them or his grandchildren to a prison sentence and says he could actually sue his daughter to try and see his grandchildren.
Look, what you know, would we all look forward to in our sort of twilight years would be probably spending more time with family, you know? And if you've got grandchildren, you'd like to see them. That's the sort of thing that people live for, frankly. So I think it's rather pitiful, but he does keep giving these interviews from time to time. I don't think he does it for the money. I think he does it because he's trying to say,
I think cynics might say he is.
I'm not sure that's the case, though. I think he genuinely wants to sort of put pressure on his daughter. You know, look, I saw one of Harry and Meghan's cheerleaders this week saying, oh, it's all the media's fault. They've created these problems. This is crazy. Look, Harry and Meghan, anytime they like, can send a car to pick him up. You know, very quietly they could do it. It's not too far, at the border of Mexico, bring him back to meet his grandchildren. It's really not a big deal if they wanted to, but they don't because, you know, Meghan has cut him out for whatever reason. And yes, it's very sad.
Richard Kay, Thomas Markle also compares himself to the king, which might seem a little bit fanciful at first, but you know, it's true, the king doesn't really have a relationship with Archie or Lilibet, does he?
He absolutely doesn't, and nor do the rest of the royal family. I mean, I think he's quite right to liken his position to that of Charles. It's a double tragedy. I mean, it's not just the exclusion of Markle from Meghan's life, it's the exclusion of the royal family from Harry's life too. And I think Thomas was quite right to say what he said. I don't blame him for reaching out. If this is the only way he can do it is through the media to try and appeal to his daughter and son-in-law he's never met to somehow set aside their differences, as Richard says, whatever they may be, and meet up. Let him see these grandchildren before it's too late.
So glad my family's so dull and not royal.
Dull is good. Dull is good. Come
dull
on.
can be good. Dull is good. Well, let's go to a happier, less dull place now. And by that I mean, let's go back to France. It's montage time. And this week we're bringing you some of our favourite pictures of the British royals on French soil. Enjoy. Even the word montage is quite Frenchy, isn't it? Montage. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll be putting out more content from the royal trip to Paris, so keep an eye out for that. Just time to say thank you to the Richards, Kay and Eden, and to you, of course, for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.